I'm running into a lot of colleagues in the industry, um, a lot of MSSPs who are subscribing to lots of different security feeds. And I scratch my head because I ask them, what about the basics? What about the stuff coming from Shadowserver Foundation, coming from these open source tools, looking at the nonprofit sort of way of doing things? They'll look at me strangely and says, "Oh, I'm very happy with all this very expensive threat intelligence." And I asked them, okay, is it really making a big impact on you? What's going on inside the organization? And this is where I get the puzzled looks because they're looking at me and says, like, wait a minute, explain. What are you talking about, Barry? What are you talking about here? So this presentation is kind of tuned towards let's go through and help people understand a new paradigm. Well, it's actually not a new paradigm because many of us have been using this for over a decade where we're using the nonprofit foundation of collaboration and the sharing that we have as a way to build our security services and products on top of. All right. So let's walk through this. All right. So typical MSSPs today, market size is huge. These are $61 billion, right? But then 61 billion projected by 2029, when you look at several of the market studies out there and you look at the profit margins and it's like 8%, says, wait a minute, there's a lot of, what's going on here? Something's broken with it. And then I'll go around and talk to different security teams and say, oh yeah, we got this feed and we got this feed and we pay for this and we pay for that. And I go like, oh, okay. What are you getting out of all of it? How are you combining it together? Oh boy, how do you integrate it together? Right? So you get this imbalance you get where you get this projected growth of what the market looks like. You get low margins, you get lots of tools and lots of confusion with it. And I go like, why don't you rethink this whole thing? You're doing everything based off a commercial and you're ignoring these fundamental community-based nonprofit organizations that actually you can leverage to actually make a more sustainable and profitable way of actually getting your work done as a cybersecurity company with lots of subscribers. So instead of having these silo defenses and doing, paying for probabilistic data, a lot of times the probabilistic data is restricted to whatever vendor is providing it to you. So a vendor X has like a cloud deployment. What they see and what they deliver to you is based off of the surface area of their cloud deployment. If what you subscribe to is something that says, oh, here's the endpoint protection, what you get is their endpoint protection customer base, right? So you get this haphazard sort of thing of what's going on with it, right? And you get the result of it is tool after tool after tool, trying to integrate each of these tools. What is really needed is kind of like a new paradigm where you actually plug into actually a matrix of foundational services, and then you can stack whatever necessary commercial services on top of it with this foundation. And that's one of the things I see missing with the MSSP place. So when you look at the old paradigm, you look at a newer paradigm, and it's not really a new paradigm because people have been using this, organizations have been using, organizations like, in this case, we're going to talk about the Shadowserver Foundation as a foundational element to the work they do. And the Shadowserver Foundation isn't the only one that you can build this on. This one, we're going to talk about the Shadowserver Foundation itself and how you actually can use their data set in the community with it, right? So Shadowserver Foundation, shadowserver.org, you go there, you start exploring it. You look at some of my other videos about the Shadowserver Foundation. I'm a long-term user of it. And in the reference in there, there's a white paper that will be linked in this video presentation so you can actually get more details on it and find out more things about it. Now, one of the key things about the Shadowserver Foundation is their data integrity process, which we'll talk about in another video because it's an interesting and unique, but unique thing of it because they never sell the data, right? They are very, very particular about who qualifies to get the data, right? So it's not open to, oh, look at this. Let's put it out there. Oh, let's use Shodan. Shodan's a very good and usable tool for cyber criminals around the world to find out what's going on with it. Shadowserver, right from the very beginning, over two decades ago, said like, no, we're not going to do this sort of like, let's open it up to the world. So they're very particular about it. That means they generate trust and trust with law enforcement, trust with national CSIRTs, trust with different valid organizations, trust where threat researchers who find a vulnerability can work with Shadowserver in a TLP red, traffic light protocol red, confidential, doesn't go out until it's ready to go out. Confidential way of actually going out there and globally. So it's a global sort of view of what's happening in the world with it. Now, then people go like, well, wait a minute. If this is a nonprofit and it has these particular areas around it, how does it apply to a security company like an MSSP? Because what Shadowserver sees is the MSSPs as trusted partners, who have a validated commercial relationship with their customers. There's a chain of trust, right? So that chain of trust, you just say, here's a security company. The security company works with Shadowserver. The security company has a customer. The customer then grants the MSSP, because they have a contract, that they can access the Shadowserver data set on their network, on their ASNs, on their IP addresses, on their domain names, right? So now that MSSP has this foundation of a tool set, and that expands out. This is why Shadowserver does it this way with the MSSP program. It expands out the surface area of contacting. When you look at the Shadowserver Foundation, their approach is all about, getting the word out to the people who need to reduce the risk, right? So that's kind of core thing with it. So it sets up this collective flywheel where you got the MSSP integrates data, their data from their customers into their tool sets. They're able to then use those alerts, which are community-based alerts. In other words, Shadowserver is a community-based sort of like, here's a risk, and sometimes a risk isn't even, exploited yet. It's just like known. We know it's going to be exploited. And people within the Shadowserver Alliance get together with Shadowserver and say, okay, let's mitigate this. All right, let's come up with a tool. Let's go out with a scan. Let's put a sensor out, right? And then you as an MSSP get notified right away. Here's the customers at risk. Not when you see it in the news, you get it from the Shadowserver Alliance community says like, this is at risk. Here's the data, go contact. Speed. It's an auto loop situation, right? So then you can say, oh, this is great. Customers like this. I'm on top of this. I've knocked on their door before they've read it in the news. Sometimes you knock on their door before the vendor who has a security risk has knocked on their door, right? And that is a value that is very profitable. That's something that is in me and putting my commercial hat on, that creates stickiness because it creates trust between you and your customer, which goes say, okay, this is really good. I like this alliance model. I like this model where the threat intelligence I'm getting, I can have a dialogue with. Many of the commercial ways of doing this, you don't have a dialogue. You call up the vendor and say, hey, can you put this new security scan out there? We just saw this. Oh, we'll get back to you next month, right? Because you're talking to a product manager. You're not talking to the actual people who are actually creating the tools, where the community-based alliance model, which is what the Shadowserver Foundation has created, you're actually dialoguing with peers around the world, CSIRTs around the world, and Shadowserver directly with it. Now, the core things that do, Shadowserver does a lot of different things, but the core things that people see all the time is number one, it scans the entire internet every day, twice a day. V4 is twice a day, and V6 it keeps on building up with there. So it's V4 and V6, right? And these scans are based off of things that the community goes through and adds into it, right? So there's tons of in there. So in this particular slide, by the time you see this, you may see this next month, there'll be more ports being scanned, more things going on. And join in the alliance structure. And actually, you don't need to join the alliance structure. You can just like ping and say to Shadowserver, hey, here's a risk. Can you scan for this? This is a vulnerability. I'm going to report it to the vendor, and Shadowserver will respond to you and go like, okay, yeah, let's TLP red, let's work it out, right? So they go through responsible disclosure, but then it's teamed up together. So scanning is one of the things. The other thing to do a lot of times in parallel is to throw up a sensor sinkhole. They got a massive sinkhole infrastructure, right? And this is a non-commercial sinkhole infrastructure, right? So it's got all this particular the sensors in there. So you can put a scan out there and you put a sensor right away when you're looking for, okay, here's a new risk. And me as a security researcher, I can contact Shadowserver and say, okay, here's what we need to scan for, and here's what we need to look for. And then we'll know when it goes known exploit vulnerability. When we start seeing exploits being tried. And then in the sensor platform, we see what source they are. Are they coming from residential proxies? Are they coming from broken in routers? Are they coming in from cloud infrastructure, right? We start seeing that telemetry. That telemetry is just spun around and we actually can see it. Plus, it gets reported. So in other words, a lot of times what happens is companies get surprised because they get contacted by Shadowserver or somebody who's using Shadowserver or the CISO who's using Shadowserver and say, hey, you got 16 devices inside your organization that are part of a exploit operation. They go like, what do you mean it? Our endpoint protection says we're all clean. Well, wait a minute. We got this data from the sinkholes that says this device is actually probing and hitting the Shadowserver sinkhole and poking it out. Okay, alert. And that happens all the time. I see that happening all the time where organizations think they are secure because they have endpoint protection, and then they show that their data is showing up where inside their firewalls they have devices that are not patched, not protected, or something's going on, right? So this is kind of like, the aspects of these 100-net sensors sort of stuff, right? And the sinkhole telemetry. All right. So these are the three more, and there's more things that Shadowserver does. These aren't the only ones out there. And it's always creating new things. Like for instance, when I was over at a previous company, we were looking at how we're mitigating the DDoS threat actors and what we're going to need for the DDoS threat actors, right? So now there is a reputation API. So if you are a DDoS protector, a DDoS, anti-DDoS company, and you're not using the DDoS reputation API, you're missing out. If you, as a customer, are subscribing to a DDoS protection service, you ask them, are you leveraging the DDoS reputation API? Because what that does is two things. One, when you're in the middle of attack, who are you getting attacked by? All you got is source addresses. So immediately you take all that and you put it into the API and you get back from Shadowserver, here's who's attacking me. Oh, these are a bunch of devices over here, and they're linked to residential proxies, or they're linked to this bot, or they're linked to this Mikotech break-ins, or the Miko, you get this data that Shadowserver has on them. But then that also adds to the collective intelligence, because then Shadowserver puts it into their reporting that these devices were just used in a DDoS attack. So these devices at ISP A will then get in their daily reports, these customers on your network were part of an attack, right? And you go like, alert, maybe I should call up my customer and say, you got something infected on there. So you get this synergistic loop that goes on with it, where the defender against the DDoS is getting more intel so they can fight the DDoS. And that data goes back into the Shadowserver collected that goes to the source organization to report to them that this is happening. Where else in the industry do you get this synergistic loop, right? The defender gets help, right? That data goes into Shadowserver, and that gets then reported to the origin of where that broken into computer that's being used for a DDoS attack is located at. Synergy, right? Which is the kind of core thing that's different with it, right? And because some of this out there, because especially with the sinkhole operations, sinkhole telemetry and the honeynet telemetry, you get this internal source address and the Shadowserver sinkhole reports. Now, one of the things that was figured out years ago, because I remember this, I've been a long time user of Shadowserver. Whatever network I've been running, whatever network I advise in, one of the first things I do is get Shadowserver up and running. And we always knew that we had to get by the NAT, network address translation. So as we get back to network address translation, because we got these internal sources, they'll wake up and start doing things like, okay, let's do scanning, let's do break-ins, let's whatever. They're broken into computers inside the NAT or the carrier grade NAT if you're a big mobile operator. So Shadowserver's data that gets reported out to say to a mobile operator, when I was over being a chief technical person at one of the mobile operators, right? I would use the Shadowserver data and go through the carrier grade NAT to find the log. So I match up the logs. Here's your Shadowserver details. Here's exact timestamps. Here's the logs. And I say, oh, it's one of these two or three addresses, right? And then I go to the addresses to track to the customer. It says, okay, it's these customers that I need to notify, right? So that sort of, how do you get through the NAT is one of the problems you run into. And Shadowserver's worked on that for decades with it. You also get one of the key things in working with Shadowserver as an MSSP is Shadowserver, the whole data paradigm of how they're very particular about here's who get access to the data to make sure there is a chain of trust with the data sets as Shadowserver is scanning for all this and collecting all this data. That means that law enforcement trusts it. Law enforcement says this is very particular. They can trust this. It can be admissible in law enforcement cases. It's been admissible in law enforcement cases. So you have multiple jurisdictions around the world where a threat actor was arrested and here's the data and the data in court, shadow server data. This is the way they do things and things like that. And it's held up, all right? That particularity with it. So Shadowserver gets called in all the time by law enforcement. We're going to do a takedown operation. We're going to do a law enforcement operation. So you take, like operational endgame, Shadowserver has been participating with operational endgame since the beginning of it. They're right there with it. They're part of the telemetry with it. And as part of that telemetry, Operation Endgame can today say, hey, Shadowserver, here's the data once they do the seizure, right? So they work with Shadowserver as they do the investigation. And when ready for the seizure, say, okay, here's our approved updates. Please send this to all your subscribers. And you get all these certs and all these subscribers, and then you, as an MSSP, right, to your customers, gets delivered, right? So you go out there and say, oh, operational endgame, next phase, because this is an ongoing operation as an example, or other law enforcement operations. Immediately you look in there, you look at my Shadowserver, hey, Shadowserver, you part of this? Yes, we are. Report's coming out soon. Boom, I got the report. You look at it. So like, okay, I got a whole bunch of customers that have credentials violated that I need to contact because they are on the violated credential list. And operational endgame is an example that goes after a lot of the credential, abusers out there who are out there doing credential stealing, right? So then you're able to go out there and call up all your different customers who are on that list and call them up. Nobody else is calling them. And you, as a security company, calls them up and says, you got to rotate these credentials. You got to rotate these credentials. You got to contact these users. You got to contact these users. Oh, you go like, oh, thank you very much. Because if you don't do that, what happens is these violated credentials get used by ransomware, APT, other threat actors, right? They're going to be used, right? And so this is one of the other core advantages with it. So let's talk through this. How does a security company, an MSSP, integrate into the Shadowserver? And there's 3 different tiers. There's kind of working with this for over a year. I've been kind of talking to different security companies and saying, like, how do you integrate into it? And it's kind of like a 7 pillars to get an MSSP plugged into it, right? And it's in 3 different tiers. So tier 1 is you just plug into it. You as a company plug into it. Make sure you're taken care of. Tier 2 is you start integrating. You start playing around with it. You integrate it into your business cycle. And then in tier 3, you go to the strategic level where you say, okay, this is working for us. Let's go out there and make sure that this does not disappear as a nonprofit. All right. So pillar 1, simple thing. You sign up for the public alias. There's an email alias. You just sign up for the public alias. And then you put in the subscription details to sign up your organization. Here's my MSSP. Here's the cloud resources I use. Here's the domain names I have. Here's the IP addresses I have. Some of you may have autonomous systems. You plug those in. That's what you plug in. Email address, plug into, out there. Now, what that does is immediately because remember, there's this alliance structure out there of all these communities and all these C-certs. They're all working together. And Shadowserver has some of the best, long-term seasoned threat actors. Like, I'm a volunteer. There's many others, my colleagues volunteers, been doing this for like 3 decades. So we know when we see this stuff and say, here's a new vulnerability, we know from our experience that this is going to be a risk. And so we immediately start working within the community to say, here's a scan, here's this, here's that. And immediately you get an email up there that says, we got a new scan. And that happens before. Reporters have figured this out. Reporters have figured out the best way to get their new news story is to sign up to the Shadowserver list because, boom, here's a new update. And immediately the news reporter goes like, oh, okay, good, let's watch. Right. And then they go to the Shadowserver public dashboard and things like that. And they got graphics and things like that. So pillar 1, just plug in your own organization in that. Then you start using it to fortify yourself. Because one of the things that we know that's happened is we had and started with JTech in South Korea, but this they're not the last. They are just kind of like the wake up call. And the wake up call was ransomware threat actors figured out, say, wait a minute, I can use my same tools. I can break into an MSSP, and then from there I can go to all the MSSP customers. The MSSP is an aggregate risk, right? If I break into that, boom, I'm out, right? Now, what happened in that particular case is the ransomware threat actor got, they tripped over the wires. Ransomware threat actors figured this out. It's a very cost-effective way to go after you as an MSSP and attack you to get to your customers. And they're going to do things better and not make the mistakes they did at JTech in South Korea back in September of last year, given it's 2025, right? So then you get the Shadowserver subscription coming in there, and you go up and clean up your own network. And then that gives you an idea of how to do things, right? And you got these alerts. And many times what I see is really nice, secure, clean networks. I can tell the difference because I'll go through there and look at the Shadowserver scan data for that particular organization, and I see 443, SSL, HTTPS. That's it. I mean, the very you wouldn't see risk out there because they're on top of it. And for many organizations, when you get to that level of security, Shadowserver becomes a double check on all your other tools, right? As an example, some of the cloud operators that have thousands and thousands and thousands of servers deployed all over the world, they use Shadowserver as a check on the server, the box itself, and that box should only have ports X, Y, and Z open. And then you use Shadowserver, who scans every day. So instead of paying somebody to scan it, Shadowserver scans every day, and they go out there and they scan, okay, X, Y, Z, ABC is open. Wait a minute, what happened here? Remove that box from the network. ABC is not, ports ABC shouldn't be there, right? Or they go into port X, and port X is 443, and here's 443, and they look at the crypto keys and they go, wait a minute, wait a minute. we expire this key, right? Because Shadowserver will check for that, right? So there's organizations out there where you get to a point where you says, I got everything locked down, then you monitor it for when things happen, because things will happen. A lot of times the break-ins happen because nobody is watching after you got everything secure, and it just happens, right? So there's several big cloud edge companies that's how they use Shadowserver. They don't use it to because they got security teams are on top of things, but what they do is use it as an audit tool, a very cost-effective audit tool. And they contribute to the Shadowserver Alliance because it's very cost-effective. And when they need a new port done, what do? They call up Shadowserver. Yo, can you add this port to here? We're part of the Alliance. Can you add this port? All right. So this is kind of like what they do. So pillar 3 is you start setting things up. So you start setting things up where you get the API key set up, right? You integrate it into your tool set. You got things, you're kind of like planning for when you contact one of your customers, all right? So this plugs you into this loop, right? So, you start getting into this access part of it. And then you start contacting your customers, right? So in this phase back here in pillar 3, this is where I recommend, contact a couple of your customers. And what do you do with your customers? You're going to go out there and ask them, okay, let's get you signed up to Shadowserver. Shadowserver will check, make sure, okay, this is the customer. And Shadowserver has several of the MSSPs to do it on behalf of the customer. In other words, they send a message in, they send the details in, they CC their customer. So Shadowserver has a ticket transaction. Yes, here's customer X. Customer X is working with vendor Y, right? X is authorizing Y to be able to get their data. They have a ticket, so it's all recorded, everything's validated. All right. And then, the MSSP then gets the data set coming from their customer. So you try out that sort of thing with it, right? So you get that work with it. Now, how much does this cost you? Nothing yet. There's no charges. Because as long as it's authorized, it's A-OK, right? And so each customer, you get an API, right? Because that allows the customer, your customer, if they don't like what you're doing and they want to move, they just call up Shadowserver and says, hey, can you cancel this API to this MSSP, we're no longer using them. All right. That's simple, right? So it makes it very clean way of managing the authorization to the data itself using this approach. Now, you start getting an aggregation effect with this. All right. So this is where you go through and you say, okay, I got one customer, two customers, three customers. I got 10 customers. The customers are responding. The customers like this. Now you're getting positive feedback. How much does that cost you? You get 10 customers signed up. How much does it cost you? Again, zero, right? It's a nonprofit, right? Yes, at this point, you should be saying, okay, we got a budget to join the Shadowserver Alliance. This is starting to work. Then you start looking around and saying, like, okay, wait a minute, how much is it? This is a cost savings. This is a comparison to this other commercial data set. We're paying a whole bunch of money to these commercial guys, and we're getting more value out of Shadowserver. Okay, let's start rethinking. This is the change of the paradigm. All right. So this collaborative stuff. Then you start going through and saying, how do we collaborate with them? Okay, you have a security team. And this happens. We got people in Shadowserver Alliance are doing this all the freaking time. This is really fantastic. This is the way that the whole Alliance support structure is supposed to work, right? So there's a couple examples of that. The Loop DDoS attack came from a university, right? Let's particularly a Shadowserver Alliance member, right? So a Shadowserver Alliance member that's working with a customer and they see a risk. Here's a vulnerability. Okay, let's go through the responsible vulnerability disclosure process. Let's go contact the vendor, things like that. And as you see what's going on, immediately you ping, okay, I'm contacting the vendor on behalf of my customer. I'm going to ping Shadowserver. So here's Shadowserver. This is happening. This is what we think. This is how we can scan it. So you start dialoguing with Shadowserver. So you're dialoguing with your customer. You're talking to the vendor who has a security risk. You're dialoguing with Shadowserver. This is all TOP red. All TOP red. Okay? This happens all the time with Shadowserver. All TOP red, all coordinated, right? And then you go, okay, vendors fixing this. Here's the risk. Here's the customer. Okay, here's my disclosure date. Here's when I go and disclose it out. So this is responsible disclosure practices out of first and best common practices in the industry. Here's my disclosure date. All right. Boom. I go out there and disclose it. Now, immediately, and this is where marketing people in MSSPs love this, because immediately there's a joint notification going out. You as an MSSP push out your blog. Here's what we found. Here's the issues. Here's the things to fix. The vendor pushes out there. Here's the patch. Here's the things you need to do. Shadowserver then pushes out, here's the scans, and here's how everybody else can detect it. And here's the link to the MSSP, your MSSP blog, and the vendor details. Now think about this. There are marketing people inside your organization who pay PR companies lots of money to actually push out and notify qualified leads who are matching your interests as an MSSP. And here Shadowserver pushes out to all their subscribers and everybody who signs up to the public mailing list, here's a new update of a risk that your company found and you worked on responsible disclosure. And then they see what's going on. They go, oh, wait a minute. Oh, this is cool. These guys got good threat researchers. They're working with Shadowserver. That's really cool. Let's call you up. Marketing. The Alliance Partnership is also a marketing vehicle, just doing the responsible disclosures and best common practices and working with Shadowserver with that. That's one of the core benefits with this. All right. So let's talk about the next one. All right. So then you start expanding. Then you say like, oh, this is pretty good. I wonder if I can work with Shadowserver and let's set up a couple of sensors in my customer network or other customer networks, right? So this is basically setting up honey nets, right? And, a lot of organizations, you get to a certain size and you want to set up honey nets. You want to set up honey nets in the cloud resources and set up in the data centers and things like that, right? This is normal. And you can set up one of them where you go out there, here's a v4 address, here's a v6 address, here's a VPN, you set it up, you get it set up the Shadowserver, says, oh, this is good working exercise. Now I got this integrated in with my customer base. Customer is going like, this is really cool. Gets another data point within the whole ecosystem of stuff. And then you get into say, okay, this is all working. Let's be serious now. Let's roll up the sleeves. Let's make sure we're investing in this whole shadow server partnership. Because if I try to do everything in-house, right? I got all this coding, all this risk, all these things going on to do it. When I sign up to all the commercial vendors, because that's the common practice, it's like option one and option two, where I've got to do the build in-house along with the commercial vendors and put it together and kind of, have this puzzle piece and try to do round peg and, square peg and round hole sort of initiative sort of stuff with it. And then you go like, okay. And then what happens? You get changes in the security market. And vendor A got bought vendor B and vendor, you get all these things going on. And we got massive new regulatory issues going on. The NIS2 and DORA are two of them. The CRA coming out next year is another one. We got all these different things. And how do you plug into this, right? So it's like, where's the baseline? What's the foundational baseline? And this is what Shadowserver provides. It's 20 years of baseline. They've been doing this for 20 years. Some people go like, oh, I'm a brand new attack surface company. It says, okay, where have you been for the last 20 years? Right? This is what Shadowserver has been doing. And the trust relationships that goes on with it. So you go, okay, yeah, let's 10K, let's go on a base level model. Let's just join in with it, right? Let's plug in at the base level model at 10K and be part of this whole community that studies the issue, consults together in TLP red and TLP strict. They come up with an action. Shadowserver pushes out new sensor, detectors, scans, right? Everybody looks at it, reviews it, and then study again. You got this loop. Study, consult, act, reflect. This is like daily. This is a daily engine within Shadowserver and the Shadowserver Alliance community. It's just, very, it's not a security organization that's like, oh, let's go talk about security. It's a security alliance. It's all about taking action over and over and over again. Study it, consult, act, reflect, back at it again, because there's always something else with it. So you look at this, that's why it's different from like a membership. Like, let's join an organization, let's join an ISAC and be a member. Let's have meetings and talk about things. Maybe we'll share some data. Maybe we won't share some data because I don't trust anybody. Where in the Shadowserver, it's all about the mission oriented of the public good. Let's go out there and fix the problems, because a problem on one part of the network in some place in the world is a problem on my part of the network, because that violations of broken into computers can then be used to attack me. It's a collective view of how do we actually protect things. And then as we build up the sustainability model for the Shadowserver, as you build up and you get more and more people signed up to it, then what happens is you have the sustainability. It sustains a partnership. So it's a way of having the nonprofit cyber sustainable, right? As a sustainability model, right? So when you look at this, you have like commercial costs, and this is where you go into your executives. And you look at the white paper. I put into the white paper to support this presentation a whole bunch of little pitches you can give inside your organization. So if you're a geek and you got to go upstream to the CIO or the CFO or the chief marketing person, you can kind of walk through. Here's these different ideas of how do you plug into this. And you look at the cost. And this is cost as I go around and talk to different MSSPs. They go like, oh yeah, we're paying, $500K a month. I go like, what? You're $500K a month? Yeah. This is what we pay for $500K a month. You got these huge, costs per month and per annual fees with it. And I kind of go look at this and go like, and they do what? Oh, they provide X. Okay, what about all this other things they do? Do they do these other things? No. Okay, if you need to get a new scan or something out there, what's your process? Oh, we have to open up a ticket and they may review the request. And I go like, wait a minute. This is like inverted. You're doing all this payment, right? Where there's foundation in the Shadowserver Alliance structure, where it's a nonprofit. It's not only more cost effective to support as an investment, right, into the Shadowserver Alliance, but you got a freaking dialogue where you can go out there and say, hello, we need this done, right? And then Shadowserver sometimes will come back, and say, oh, actually what you're asking to do, we're going to have to increase our infrastructure. We're going to have to increase the scans. This is a really good idea, but we're going to need some extra funding. Oh, okay. Well, it goes to a nonprofit. Let's fund that, right? So the Shadow Server dashboard, if you go to dashboard at shadowserver.org, this is UK government says, hey, we need this. And Shadow Server says to UK government, that's a really brilliant idea. But we need money to actually build that. And UK government said, sure, okay, here's a grant. Go build this. Boom. Now we have a dashboard that people that use. You see this in, especially in the press. It's an easy way that reporters go out there. So this is kind of like the different model. Is it changing the cogs around? It doesn't mean you replace the commercial tools. It just means you use Shadow Server as an anchor at the foundation, and then you can stack the appropriate commercial tools on top of it and get more out of it, right? So you kind of let's walk through these stages again. So stage one is you enroll, it's free. You get plugged in, you get the alerts, right? And then stage two is you start signing up your customers and saying, here's how this works with this and integrate it into your business model. Then you go to stage three and you go like, all right, we're going to make sure this all happens. This is a fundamental structure of how we do business now. And this is making things cheaper. And now we can look at this where we're spending less on this. We can hire more people and get better margins, right? New paradigm, better margins with it. So again, 10K, you sign up, base level, boom, right there. So it's easy to sign up and plug into the community. And I recommend this as like, a lot of companies who could be big companies and can say, yeah, I can go on the 150 and diamond sponsor. Good if you do that. But see, a lot of times it's how do you integrate into and get the workflow? So you get into, as quick as possible, boom, here's the 10K, I sign up. I get a bunch of my threat researchers into the alliance communities. I start leveraging what's going on. I'm dialoguing directly with the Shadow Server team, right? So I've already put my money on the table. I'm committed to actually make this whole structure better, right? And with that, you start integrating into it. And then you go into like 6 months later, say like, okay, this is working out. We just knocked off this commercial feed. We didn't need that. We knocked off this other commercial feed. We didn't need that. We got this. Our customers are happy because they're starting to sign up our customers. All right, let's look at gold, platinum, diamond. This is great. We're saving a ton of money, and we want Shadow Server to go out there and expand, do more. We got some new ideas for Shadow Server. Let's go out there and call them up, right? And say, hey, what do you guys think about this? And then Shadow Server says, oh, let's craft up. We're a nonprofit, but we got to hire people to do these things and expand the resources. That's all cool. Here's what you do. Here's a SOW for it. Can you guys fund this? Right. And that is a model that's not a model that's new. This model where you go through, here's a nonprofit structure. Nonprofit in this case for Shadow Server, nonprofit for like communities in the Linux Foundation. You go to an open source project in the Linux Foundation, you go to Internet Systems Consortium, right, with Bind and DHCP and say, I need this feature or function. They'll nonprofit will create the SOW and then you fund that SOW, the code that into the open source, or the code that in the Shadow Server infrastructure. This is not a new concept of how Shadow Server is setting up its sustainability model with the Alliance partnership, right? So you got this aspect here, this convergence, where the MSSP is profitable, right? Is making more money. It's contacting all the customers, and the customers are achieving the Shadow Server mission by getting the risk reduced, all right? And then you got the public good, because then the funding of the Shadow Server Alliance, you get the public good, because somebody who's not that MSSP's customers on another part of the world, right? They're getting the benefit of the daily free feeds and capabilities out there to actually get things mitigated. National CSIRTs are getting data that is unique that they're not getting from anywhere else. This is the kind of quarter of structural alignment. All right. This is how it's like, the convergence between the two. So look at the white paper when you get to this. And in there, I kind of broke down in the addendum white paper, how would you talk to your CEO? How would you talk to your CFO? How would you talk to your CISO? How would you talk to your chief marketing officer? Yes. How would you talk to your customer support team? Right? So it gives examples in different addendums, right? With different little scripts that you can cut and paste and send a message. Hey, we should look at joining a Shadow Server. We should look and leveraging them and plugging them into it, right? And so, each of them is a different viewpoint in there of how you can actually go through there. So I hope this has been helpful and valuable to you. If you have questions, ask them in the comments in the video below. Subscribe because this is one of many sort of cost-effective, nonprofit, different sort of thinking out of the box ways that we can actually address a cybersecurity problem. Um, and you can contact me. I got my email, my contact information in the slides and in the white paper. And so this is one of the things I do these days as somebody who's been doing this for like, plus 40 years of doing cybersecurity and network engineering work. Sign up, get on the Shadow server, save you a bunch of money, and be able to actually mitigate risk fast. I've been doing it for decades. I welcome you to do the same thing.